Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Why AI. This week I'm joined by Al Kingsley. Al is a multi-academy trust chair, author and all-round education enthusiast. In this episode we discuss some fantastic topics from AI's place in education to some of Al's mid-journey masterpieces. I hope you all enjoy. Well, Al, thank you for joining me today. Welcome to Why AI podcast. I appreciate you joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks. I always like this topic because my name looks very similar to AI.
It,
So
it
whenever I see articles, I think, who's blaming me for this, or who's talking about me as an opportunity?
Yeah, you've hashtagged a few because obviously I follow you on Twitter and LinkedIn and everything like that. And when you hashtag AI, I don't know whether you're hashtagging yourself or hashtagging AI.
That would be a little bit pretentious, wouldn't it?
A little bit, perhaps. But yeah, thank you for joining me today. So just to give perhaps our listeners just a bit of background information of who you are, what you do, how you got into the position you're in. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Al.
A very brief synopsis of Al. I generally introduce myself as a man of two hats, which is really just to separate. I suppose I've got two very fortunate career pathways. So 30 years in the technology space,
Well, right.
edtech sector. I'm Group CEO of NetSport. They're a technology company that create lots of solutions for schools and for businesses as well. In parallel to that, I'm a dad, and my children are now in their late 20s. But I got involved when they were very young in supporting local school being built, involved in governance. I,
Right.
from that, have chaired a number of schools. I've been chair of a multi-academy trust for the last 10 years, chair an alternative provision academy. And for the last 4 or 5 years, I've sat on the regional schools directors advisory board for the East of England. So I
Wow.
sit with a group of trust CEOs and we support MATs across the region. I chair the regional SEND board, supporting obviously our most vulnerable learners.
Yes.
With my commercial hat on, representing the role of technology in schools, I chair the BESA EdTech Group, so the British Education Suppliers Association. So I find myself, not necessarily intentionally, but through a fortunate series of events, I sound like Lemony Snicket or somebody at that point, where I've kind of got best part of 30 years in edtech and nearly 30 years in education in different roles. And
Right.
so when we're looking at challenges and problems and solutions, sometimes there's a segue between those two, the transferable experiences, ideas, or solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to just ask you. Do you find that they both sort of complement each other?
They do in many ways. I think first and foremost, trying to take the idea of technology that works in the business place and saying that's a natural fit for education. We all know it's much more nuanced than that. So, in the spirit of co-production, the more you're involved in a space and working with it, where the challenges are, the better equipped you are to understand the problem and come up with solutions. But I think the bigger one is there's always been a bit of a mindset. If I think about the pure governance, and now there are governors, members, trustees, different roles, it's always been perceived as people giving up their time to support education. And of course, that's kind of right. But increasingly, I think people are starting to learn that actually you also learn a lot from education that is transferable back into the workplace.
Right.
The way
Okay.
systems, processes, well-being, communication. And so I often talk now about get involved with schools, not to just do your charitable thing, but actually it's great professional development for middle leaders looking to acquire different types of skills that they can take back into the workplace. And that's one of my very small missions about a little bit more respect for what goes on in education. And
Okay.
actually, you know, it's something important that we can learn from.
Yeah, brilliant. So it's helping everybody essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. Okay, so how did you originally sort of get into just casting your mind back a little bit to the beginning? What did you sort of stumble across it, or was it something you just knew you wanted to get into originally?
I think like most people, you pick a pathway, and my pathway was to go to leave, education and go into finance. So I
Right.
trained in finance. Um,
Okay.
but what I found very quickly was I actually found more interest in the emergence of the technology, the systems, than I did on the numbers. So this is sadly, I mean, it's hard to believe given how youthful I look. This is the 80s I'm talking about.
Wow.
So in terms of
Looking
technology,
good. Looking good.
computers, thank you. Um, every year it was something new. We were heading from massive mainframes in the back office to desktop computers, albeit fairly junky and low powered.
Yeah.
And so there was much more opportunity to learn, and in finance, things are done a certain way for a reason.
Mhm.
I'm going to just pause. I do apologize. My
No,
little
don't
poo
worry about it.
started
Yeah.
barking. I don't know if you can hear that.
No, I can't, but it's fine. Yeah, don't worry about it.
So yeah, we went for a period where we went from mainframes to desktop computers. And
Okay.
one of the challenges when it comes to finance, for me anyway, was we always do things a certain way for a reason. There's not a lot of option for a bright young upstart to say, hey, why don't we do things a different way? And so from an innovation point of view, there was much more scope for me to do what I felt was cool things with technology. And so that journey from being more involved in technology resulted in me meeting somebody who was developing, albeit on DOS, so black and white screens, folks, not a lot of visual, a tool with a modem to remotely connect to a PC that was somewhere else. Save you getting in your Ford Mondeo and heading up the motorway.
Yeah.
And so started working on that technology and evolving it, but then quickly realized the same idea of being able to see a screen 100 miles away
Mhm.
actually translates to being able to see 30 screens 10 feet away. And that was the advent of looking at instructional technology. How
Okay.
about the teacher being able to see what all the children are doing on their devices? And then you start thinking about, can I shepherd and nurture them? Can I launch things on their screens? Can I keep them safe on those computers? Can I, the list goes on.
Yeah, just
So
go.
it
Yeah.
very much became the case that we were kind of seeing in education an advent from a few very expensive BBC Micros or other desktop computers that was seen as a specialist that area that children might access once every few weeks, to the evolution of technology in schools. And as we've gone over the years, not only have we seen lots of false dawns, because we've had all sorts of technology manufacturers saying, what you need in your school is this. And often the technologies arrive without a clear purpose and
Right.
intent, and how do we measure impact? And of course, I'm sure any teacher listening in will say, as often happens, stuff arrives, but we don't get the right amount of time for CPD preparation, being confident with the technology,
Mm.
looking at how we can develop and actually use it effectively within the curriculum. And then over the last 10 years, we've moved to a model where we have a lot more connectivity between schools, the
Yeah.
multi-academy trust structure, rather than the LA model. So now we've got lots of schools feeding into a central point, and we're much more interested in how do we effectively utilize data? How do we see what's happening? How do we support? How do we leverage economies of scale? How do we share best practice with the tools we use in curriculum? So suddenly it's become a very digital world. And so for me, it's like actually solutions start with understanding the problem, not creating a tool. Probably 10 years ago, the world allegedly was going to be fixed by getting yourself some Google glasses. But nobody said how you're going to weave that in the classroom. There were many classrooms that had iPads in the classroom, but were using them simply as a writing surface, or dare I say, interactive whiteboards at the back of the room that were
Yeah.
just a digital blackboard. And the concept of, I guess, some things you'll be familiar with, things like the SAMR model, that idea that we can look at technology and substitute, we can switch from
Mhm.
paper to a digital surface,
Yeah.
but we could also augment and modify and redefine, and we could start doing extra cool things with it.
Mhm.
Kind of missed the point for quite a while. And it's only really recently that I think we've started to really, in the broadest sense, there's some amazing innovators who've been doing it for years, but I think the pandemic has kind of escalated up the list, the conversation around edtech and digital in schools, and
Yeah.
how that might be used for purpose.
Of course. I mean, especially with the fact that having to use technology so much more due to, remote learning and things like that, I suppose that will have amped
Yeah.
up the situation and the
I saw in a lot of international schools, particularly probably because they were ahead of the curve in terms of having nice devices for every child.
Mhm.
When the pandemic started, they kind of flipped to remote learning, but it was quite prescriptive. And I
Right.
think the thing we're starting to understand now is, one size doesn't fit all. There's real differences about where technology is appropriate, depending on the cohort of students and the teacher, and that we're not doing shiny things just to be experiential, but they've actually got to have purpose and actually facilitate. We say teaching and learning, but the key is learning, isn't it, ultimately?
Yeah.
So I think, now the conversation's moved to, well, there's been a bit of a kickstart with more technology in our schools.
Mhm.
We've started thinking about a digital strategy, how technology is used now, but also what do we want to try and achieve in the years ahead? How
Mhm.
might that align with our school development plan and so on?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we've started thinking actually much more like great podcasts like this and others, that actually our ability to access professional development when it comes to technology, whether it's well-being, whatever the topic may be, we're now not, we're not restricted to the school library. There are so many places online that we can listen to, get best practice and ideas from others,
Definitely.
that's fostering the idea that we can try new things.
Right, brilliant. Yeah, so you sort of not there's not a singular school alone in the dark in a situation. You can actually, expand and look in different places like this, and
I think it's what we say about all of our own professional development. You can't always
yeah,
look within. If you want to improve as a school, sometimes you have to look outside and see what others are doing
yeah,
and cherry pick those best ideas. And that's the same with professional development. We could spend an hour stumbling on our own through various YouTube videos, or we could listen to people who've been there, done that,
yeah,
and that's the sum of it.
yeah, absolutely, brilliant. So just sort of moving more onto the topic of the in the title of the podcast,
There's a hint there, isn't there?
a little bit of a hint, in AI. So
Yeah.
AI is obviously, uh, has been around for a long time. I always, we always tend to have this
Yeah.
conversation. It's been around for quite a long time. People don't really realize how long it's been around for, I think. In what it is, I think people just see it sort of as this chat GPT world that we now live in, kind of thing.
In the new catalyst, doesn't it, really, for everything
Yeah,
that people talk about, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there's many more, in a sense of art as well. As I wanted to
I
get
might be
this in.
guilty.
I wanted to get this in at some point. Your Twitter, LinkedIn, pages. Those pictures are fantastic. I love them. I think the one in the water, that might be the most recent one you posted. I think
Yeah.
that's my favorite. That's really good.
It's nice to be able to share an experience or what's going on today in a visual sense without actually having to get the clothes wet. So,
Yeah, yeah,
for those listening, I'm always believe the best way to learn things is to play with them.
yeah,
That's the way you really cement. And so, I like the idea to engage people when you're talking about dry subjects. And let's be honest, for a lot of people in education, technology is a scary word, and it's certainly not an "ooh, let's turn the page."
yeah.
I try always to make things a little bit more humorous. So playing with Midjourney, which is a
Mm,
brilliant tool, unless you want to do
fantastic
text,
tool.
in which case it's not so good.
No.
But in terms of creating that, I create for people, images of me on safari
Yeah.
in the water being chased by sharks and all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's just a fun way of saying, actually, we can use these tools. Now, the reality is we're not going to create images of ourselves for the classroom, but we shouldn't be paying or dragging around looking for royalty-free artwork when potentially there's tools like Midjourney, Canvas. There's so many out there that we could be accessing to get content that would quickly allow us to make, bespoke stuff that we can share with our
Yeah.
children.
And quite in detail stuff as well. And when once
Absolutely. Yeah.
teaching the prompts and everything for that, has definitely got a lot of potential, hasn't it, in regards to art and
I,
things like
I
and
think the key thing, Harry, is, and I think it's an interesting one that you kind of focus on those prompts. One of the most important skills that I think is certainly as we progress to the latter stages of our education is about developing the skills for effective questioning. And that applies to children, but it applies to teachers too, obviously. And what we have seen with the advent, whether it's a Midjourney, how do I get an image that bears some resemblance to the one that's in my head?
yeah,
Or we think about Chat GPT, Bard, Perplexity, or 500 other different pathways you could go now.
yeah,
Um, Actually, the devil is all in the quality of questioning. There's how specific you are, how you narrate what it is you want to achieve. And that doesn't matter whether it's a child wanting to get a cool picture with a shark chasing them, or whether you want to get the scaffolding and framework for a lesson plan. It's always, we always used to say back in the early days when computers were first being used, from a coding perspective, garbage in, garbage out. And so
yeah.
the same applies with AI. The quality, the direction, the specifics you apply fundamentally affect the quality of what you get back out.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Just as a bit quite a quite a heavy question, I suppose.
Mm.
Sort of. Do you see AI in education as a whole positive thing or a negative thing? Obviously, I know it's not as black and white as that. I know there are ifs and buts, but obviously that's it's sort of engaging in that question.
I think any topic, if we supplemented AI for anything new in
Mhm.
education, we should always be mindful that there is risk and there is opportunity.
Yeah.
If I take it in the round, the answer has to be there's more opportunity than there is risk.
Right.
And I
Okay.
say that because no matter what we try and do within education, and at the moment we've been through a few years where actually most people tend to prefer to critique and criticize and kick rather than actually understanding that we give this one cohort the job of creating our future society and our future workforce with all those skills, and we massively undervalue what's being added. But what we can't ignore is, particularly because of the pandemic, there's been a seismic shift in the workplace. The workplace now is much more hybrid. People are working from anywhere and everywhere using technology, digital tools, and AI in its various forms. And in some cases, the AI on the sticker doesn't actually mean it's particularly AI under the bonnet,
Yeah.
is becoming fundamental in the tools that we use in the workplace. So we have no choice, but our learners need to leave school with an understanding of what those tools are and how to get and leverage the most out of them. So we're required to utilize AI in some shapes and forms, or we certainly will be as we think about equipping our learners for the future.
Mm.
Within education, there's a natural conversation, which is when we measure impact and we think about our biggest pressures, we get drawn to, well, it's progress and attainment ultimately. How well have our learners done? Um, I'm I'm less of a fan, and that's not to say that's not important. Firstly, I'm less of a fan in the sense that I think we need to be looking at how we broaden what we're delivering for our learners, because I think increasingly skills, soft skills, cognitive, critical thinking skills, challenging skills, digital skills are becoming more important. It's finding that balance, not to replace our literacy and numeracy, but to
Mm.
find a way that that can be complementary. And I often talk about a project that I've worked on with the Foundation for Education Development. I co-chair their work stream with the OECD, who are
Right.
looking at a fresh way to replace the PISA rankings. And around the world, we
Yeah.
say Finland's top, Singapore's here. This is where these are, and they're all based on a metric of 15-year-olds around the world across a core set of subjects and where their development and their progress is. I suppose in many ways, if for UK listeners, it's a bit like the EBAC buckets, EBAC kind of
Yeah.
topics, or even your Progress 8 buckets. But what they're now looking at is saying, actually, we want something different, which is we want a school system for human flourishing, which is saying, actually, just because a child in this country achieves the highest outcomes, do they leave education thinking, thank goodness that's over, and I've been learning all these things by rote for the last 10 years?
Mm.
Or do they leave resilient, well-rounded, with a sense of inquisitiveness and
Mm.
purpose, with a love of lifelong learning, with a sense that they're equipped with the right skills and challenges to move forward in the world? And those kind of things rarely get measured when we think about our school league tables. And often the pinch point is, well, we've already got an obligation to do all these things. So how the hell are we supposed to squeeze those into the timetable?
Right.
So it's kind of moving now into, actually, let's start thinking much more about skills acquisition and how that pulls together, I guess.
Mm. Right. Okay. I'm with you. I mean, it's obviously a very quite a complex topic of conversation. I just think it's something that, I mean, from
Yeah.
what I've seen and who I've spoken to, about this, it's obviously there's always going to be that cautious sort of kicking, if you like.
There is, but I think it's because we think of AI, and we maybe I shouldn't presume. Lots of people will have a mental picture of what AI means,
Yeah, big scary
And if we think
robot.
about AI in education, what do we mean? We could think about non-generative AI, and we could think of, well, there's already tools that we use for personalized learning pathways that will stretch and challenge our more able learners, or will automatically identify and take them back a couple of steps to improve their foundation. And we've seen that across our core curriculum subjects, tools available utilizing non-generative AI for some years, and have grown with momentum and have got young people engaged on really developing and practicing certain skills. And then we've also got, I said that big thing where our focus for risks in our schools, or our main measures of impact, are about outcomes and, progress and attainment. But actually, if we really sit down as a leadership of a multi-academy trust or a school, our risks right now are staff recruitment and retention, financial viability, student social, emotional, and mental health,
Yeah.
and outcomes,
Yeah.
and when's Ofsted next due. And there'll be some other things like, where's the capital funding to replace the boiler that we haven't got? But actually, if we look around that, there's as much of a conversation around the way that AI and technology can be used to support the ecosystem of the school or the multi-academy trust and staff, as there is specifically about the bit that sits within the curriculum conversation. So, in the same way as there's been AI tools for years that have been effectively used to say, I've got a database here of 50,000 men of a certain age, and based on age, weight, lifestyle, hair color, and whatever, I can identify those cohort that are at most at risk of a heart attack or type 1 diabetes, whatever it may be. I'm obviously making up for effect, but we can use some assumptions. There's the same way we can use it when we're looking at where are there gaps in children's attainment. Let's look at the data and the evidence that's been captured, whether
Yeah.
it's summative or formative. We can capture evidence, and we can perhaps save staff time by identifying more effectively where they need to revisit topics or where a cohort haven't got that next bit for the sequence that they need in their learning journey.
Yeah.
There's much more we could use technology to. Where can we effectively deploy and apply resources? I do think there's a lot that can be used to support teachers in preparation of content. And when we start talking about AI and lesson planning and resources and so on, there's a natural persuasion to say, because that's the stepping stone to AI replacing the teacher, right? Well, no.
Right.
In my view,
No.
hell no, never. The
No.
most important asset is the human interaction between the child and student. And if people understand that teachers are far more than imparters of information, they
Yeah.
would realize that that's a whole different area. Where
Absolutely.
there's that bit that flips the other way that you kind of referenced is there's always going to be a concern. And that's something where we need to have better standard structure and, like most technology, better transparency. What data are we storing? Where are we storing it? Who has access to it? How long does it exist for? And if we make assumptions that help speed up, whether it's assessment of a child's progression or supporting a child on a learning pathway, what assumptions is it making? What algorithms is it using? Are we happy there's no weighting or there's no bias against a certain cohort of our children or learners?
Yeah.
And how do we, as a practitioner, actually validate that we're happy with the assumptions? There's also the bit about content, isn't there? You know, we'd rather not be using an AI platform to capture resources that goes across the net and captures resources from everywhere. In an ideal world, it would be curated to resources specifically appropriate for education and specifically assessed for quality. Now, we're kind of moving in that direction. The rush to get a chat GPT and a Bard and others out there, we're seeing the early stages where quality, probably in terms of the information shared, is not at the level where the natural language processing is, because it reads pretty well and it sounds like a human being giving me a summary, but I can't actually trust that information.
No.
But I kind of think, well, right now, one of the biggest things we've been doing with our children and our learners, I mean, think of Brexit, think of the US general elections. It's not that information's there, it's understanding how you critically challenge the validity of the information, how you actually research that information
Yeah.
and form a context, not being in your echo chamber of just because it's your friends and they're all sharing it, that
Of
becomes
course.
dominant. It's
Yeah.
kind of the same when it comes to data sets with AI. And
Yeah.
so there's a conversation to be had. And probably the biggest one for me right now is, and it's not just AI, it's all technology providers in education. We need to make sure that there isn't an umbilical cord where that data is used for anything other than supporting the teaching and learning of those children.
Of course. Yeah. Because then I suppose, obviously, especially in schools where GDPR is so important, it can go kaput quite quick and then also sort of ruin it for everything else.
Yeah, but it's also, if you look, you know, we know AI works on data sets. The more data you've got, the better informed your
Of
decision is.
course. Yeah.
Well, we don't want that data to be something that sticks around for years and potentially links to, you know, a child's been researching for their sports sciences at school, and miraculously, when they log in at home on their social media platforms or whatever, they're constantly promoted adverts around sporting goods and
Yeah.
technology. You know, did
Of
that
course.
child's data follow and move from one purposeful data set to something that they never really agreed to and assigned to? And that's just an example for effect. But I think there's a huge both moral obligation on technology for schools to be technology for schools,
Mm.
and for vendors to be really transparent in where that data is stored, and they shouldn't be sharing it.
Absolutely. If you were to have a bit of a think again, a bit of a not a very black and white question whatsoever. None of it is really, I suppose.
No,
The
no.
topic in general is not a black and white one. But 5 to 10 years from now, if you were to look at the school model, and where
Mm.
technology and where AI's place in it is. How does that look to you?
I think in 5 years from now, certainly 10 years from now, it will be fundamentally established in many of the tools that we use in our schools, but it won't be a conversation that we're having every day. I don't wish to call it the novelty factor, but it will be a fundamental part of how systems operate effectively
Yeah.
and how staff utilize technology to fit in what's expected of them in a working day when we know the glass is already full and we've got to pour something out before we pour more responsibility in. Um, I think what always happens is when you get early adoption of technology, it highlights both the benefits or potential benefits, but the deficiencies. And if chat gpt and other solutions, that the technology behind the scenes in different iterations has been used in other solutions, but if we were to have sat on that for 2 more years and then it came through and it was more polished and it was more transparent and the
Yeah.
speed there of development is huge. It kind of reminds me of the original Moore's law that was associated with technology, that every year technology gets twice as fast and half the size, and that's the speed of development, and I
Yeah.
think the same applies with technology. Where I think we've got to be really careful is, any digital strategy, the same way as any strategy in a school for progression, we kind of need to be really clear on what we intend to do, why we're doing it, and how we're going to measure it. And sometimes the why we're doing it needs to kind of be paused, and we need to go back over that again, because
Mhm.
there's no argument that says the best schools have the most technology or the best schools are the ones that are at the forefront of technology. The best schools are the ones that use technology where appropriate, with purpose, and in a way that they can measure impact. And so I think, in the same way as some of the best lessons will never involve technology, they will be the human interaction, talking
Absolutely.
about fantastic written works or drama or whatever it may be. There will be others where technology might level the playing field. Certainly when I think about our SEND children, thinking my role at an AP academy, there's different ways to engage some of our less connected learners,
Mm.
where technology can be a great pathway. I'm thinking about some of our year 7 nurture group students who, rather than diving straight into the works of Shakespeare, are building the Globe Theatre in Minecraft, starting to
Yeah.
talk about the shape and the positioning and the roles of the actors. There's lots of different ways, alongside great accessibility tools that can be supportive and preemptive in that regard. So there's stepping stones, but you can't push water uphill. The
No,
workplace is going to be using AI in any and every way possible to be
absolutely.
more efficient, to be more cost effective, to be more competitive. So we can't just say, well, that's what the world is going to be for anybody who's over 18 years of age, but we're going to stay in splendid isolation and never adopt it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you don't at an early age, obviously, when the mind is quite spongy, as some might say, I suppose it will put them in a bit of a precarious situation when they leave school or leave university or wherever, and the world is using it and they aren't. I suppose time is of the essence with that.
Well, when we talk about something like social media, we
Mm.
naturally think lots of negative terms around that,
Yeah.
and justifiably so.
Yeah.
But you know what? A lot of people use Twitter, LinkedIn
Mm.
for networking, for professional development, for
Cool.
learning, and so on. So rather than not mentioning to children that social media exists,
Mm.
it's far better to talk about social media, the ways that it can be used to benefit them in their careers, development, and their virtual CVs, and at the same time have an opportunity to talk about the risks and the things to be mindful of, and to be thinking about that digital disinhibition and what we might say online is going to be there for in perpetuity. There you are, said that 3 ways. um, but it sparks the conversation. Well, the same
Yeah.
conversation should be around AI. There's loads of tools that could really help you, but it's not meant to replace your journey to check and balance as a human being, to learn and understand the context. It's there to help you go further, find out more, get extra bits of information if it's used effectively.
Yeah, fantastic. We are coming towards the end now. We're a bit pressed for time. Before obviously we end the conversation here today. You have recently written a book on growth. And I wanted to just ask you a bit about that. How do you find technology, going towards growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's a key lever. I mean, I've been very lucky. I've written a few books for schools, and I've always written it on the imagine you and I are having a chat now, as we are, Harry.
Mm. Yeah,
I think sometimes you keep it simple, stupid, to talk about the different aspects. So when we think about the challenges on schools at the moment, growth is often a solution to a number of things. It can be economies of scale and financial. But it can also be a way of retaining good staff. Becoming part of a cluster provides more opportunities for personal development and career pathways as well,
yeah,
opportunities for sharing best practice. But if you imagine all those individual entities coming together, the glue that connects them all is having the right systems. You know, you're going to be sharing your MIS system. You want to get data that can show where certain parts of one of your primary schools perhaps is performing well and another primary perhaps has gaps and could learn from it. There will absolutely be savings if you're all using the same technology.
yeah,
There are ways that you can absolutely, in the same way as, you know, lockdown, we share not just lessons online, but we recorded lots of exemplars of how to do things. Well, in the same way, we want that ecosystem within our multi-academy trusts or our school clusters or our school districts in America, whatever it may be, that actually connectivity and having the right infrastructure in place allows us to unlock the sharing of resources, which fundamentally is what saves time for staff in our schools and allows us separately to start thinking about not data for data's sake, but data that actually helps shape and inform actions. What does it mean, and what can I do as a result of what's being shared with me? And that kind of purposeful use of technologies kind of at the heart of what I talk about. So my growth book is very much, you're a school, you've got 10 different ways that you could grow, from growing your cohort to adding bits on your school to joining a cluster to joining a mat to being a mat and having others join you. And here are all the questions you should be asking, the things you should be thinking about, and how you might take that conversation forward.
Oops, sorry, you broke up a little bit there. Al, 1 second. Come back. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. Sorry
Can you hear
about
me all
that.
right?
Yeah, it's lagging behind a little bit. My apologies. Are we
That's all
good?
right.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, so everybody read. Do you have your Twitter handle you want to sort of tell everybody and LinkedIn and things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn as Al Kingsley. Have a search on Twitter. I'm Al Kingsley _edu. And if you're trendy and you're an Instagrammer, I also have my EdTech Diary, which is a Instagram page that covers lots of tips and topics for you as well.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Al. I really appreciate it. It's been great to
Been my
talk to you.
pleasure, Harry.
Yeah, I could sit and listen to you all day, but unfortunately we don't have it. So yeah, fantastic. We'll do it again sometime.
Take care, sir.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much.